My name is Natalie Fletcher, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in the gravel driveway of what might be the most beautiful lake house I've ever seen, holding a set of keys that were just handed to me by a woman I've never met before. Behind me, my entire family has gone completely silent. My parents, my brother, my sister, their spouses, even the kids have stopped chattering. For months, they've been talking non-stop about our lake house and the family vacation property. They planned every detail of this trip, assigned bedrooms, mapped out activities, but here's the thing nobody bothered to mention until 30 seconds ago. This house isn't theirs. It's mine. Or more accurately, it was bought with my money without my knowledge or permission. The property manager just called my name, handed me the deed, and now everyone is staring at me like I've just detonated a bomb in the middle of our family reunion. Before we dive into how everything fell apart, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments, because I'd love to know where my story is reaching. And if you've ever dealt with family drama over money, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Hit that like button, smash subscribe, and let's get into the mess that became my life the moment those keys touched my hand. 3 months before that driveway confrontation, my phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. My older brother Troy had sent a message in all caps. We bought a lake house. Within minutes, the chat exploded. My mother Constance was already planning menus for a summer gathering. My sister Bethany posted a dozen photos of this gorgeous craftsman-style property with a private dock and massive windows overlooking clear blue water. Everyone was using words like investment and legacy, and finally, I sat on my couch in my small apartment, staring at those photos, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that came whenever my family did something big without me. The Fletcher family has always been about real estate. My father Leonard built a small empire of rental properties over 3 decades. Troy followed directly in his footsteps and now owns a property management company. Bethany married Russell, who works in commercial real estate, and together they flip houses on the side. Then there's me. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work from home, set my own hours, and make enough to cover my bills with a little left over for savings. To my family, this makes me the failure. They've never said it outright, but I've heard it in every conversation. When Troy bought his third rental property at 28, Dad threw him a dinner party. When I landed my biggest client last year, Mom asked when I was going to get a real job. So seeing those lake house photos, I assumed once again I was on the outside of a family investment I couldn't afford to join. But what really twisted the knife was how excited everyone was. Constance immediately started assigning rooms. She put Troy and his wife Cassidy in the master because they have the kids. Bethany and Russell got the suite with the private balcony. My parents claimed the downstairs bedroom with the ensuite bath. And me? I got the small room on the 3rd floor that used to be an attic. Not that I complained, I was just grateful to be included at all. For weeks, every family dinner turned into a planning session for this lake house vacation. Bethany designed a whole logo, a wooden sign that said Fletcher Family Lake House Est. 2024, with a little illustration of pine trees and waves. Troy brought blueprints to Sunday brunch and talked about adding a hot tub and expanding the dock. Dad nodded along like a proud patriarch, watching his empire grow. I kept waiting for someone to mention the finances. How much did this place cost? Who paid what? Was I expected to contribute? But every time I tried to bring it up, the conversation shifted. Troy would say something vague, like family investment, or we're all in this together. Cassidy, my sister-in-law, had this way of looking at me with pity whenever money came up, like she felt sorry that I couldn't contribute at my income level. The implication was clear. The successful siblings had pooled their resources to buy this amazing property, and I was being included out of charity. It stung, but I swallowed it. That's what I always did with my family. Swallowed the barbs, smiled through the condescension, and told myself that at least I was still part of the group. What none of them knew was that 6 months earlier, my grandmother Ida had passed away and left me a substantial inheritance. $85,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, and it was mine. Grandma Ida had always been different from the rest of the family. She didn't care that I chose art over real estate. She celebrated my independence, told me I was brave for making my own path. When the attorney read her will, I cried for an hour. Not just because of the money, but because she saw me, she valued me. The inheritance was placed in a trust with my father as the trustee until all the paperwork cleared. Dad assured me it was just a formality, that I'd have full access within a few months. I had plans for that money. Real plans. A down payment on my first home. Maybe a used car that didn't make weird noises when I hit the brakes. Security. Freedom. But every time I asked Dad about accessing the funds, he had an excuse. Paperwork delays, tax complications, legal reviews. He was a trustee. He managed money for a living, so I believed him. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was not pushing harder when weeks turned into months, and I still couldn't touch a penny of my own inheritance. Instead, I watched my family plan their lake house vacation and tried not to feel bitter that I couldn't afford to contribute to their family dream when I had $85,000 sitting in an account I apparently wasn't allowed to access. The vacation was planned for the first week of July. Perfect weather, Dad said. The lake would be warm enough for swimming, the town nearby had a 4th of July festival, and the property had enough space that we wouldn't be on top of each other. Constance made elaborate shopping lists. Bethany created an itinerary with time slots for fishing, hiking, and family game nights. Troy bragged to his friends that the Fletcher family now had a vacation home. I packed my bag 3 days early and told myself that maybe this trip would be good. Maybe being there, seeing everyone happy, would help me feel less like an outsider and more like part of this family legacy they kept talking about. I had no idea I was about to discover that the legacy was built on my stolen money. We arrived at the property in a caravan of 3 vehicles on a Saturday morning, so bright it hurt to look at the lake without sunglasses. Troy's SUV led the way, packed with his wife Cassidy and their 2 kids who were already fighting over who got which bedroom. My parents followed in Dad's truck, and Bethany and Russell came up behind them. I drove alone in my beat-up sedan that had been nursing along for 6 years, the one I was supposed to replace with my inheritance money. The driveway was long and winding, lined with tall pines that filtered the sunlight into golden streaks. When the house came into view, I actually gasped. The photos hadn't done it justice. The structure was stunning. 2 stories of deep brown wood and river stone, massive windows that reflected the sky, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs already positioned like something out of a vacation magazine. The lawn sloped down to a private dock, where a small boat was tied up, bobbing gently in the morning breeze. This wasn't just a lake house. This was the kind of property that cost serious money, the kind of place that showed up in real estate listings with price tags that had multiple commas. I did quick mental math as I parked. Properties like this in desirable lake areas went for at least $300,000, probably more. How had Troy and Bethany afforded this? Even with their success, that was a massive purchase. Everyone piled out of their vehicles in a chaos of excited voices and slamming doors. Troy immediately took charge, acting like the master of ceremonies. "Welcome to the Fletcher family legacy," he announced, spreading his arms wide like he was unveiling a masterpiece. The kids ran toward the dock, Cassidy chasing after them and yelling about life jackets. Bethany already had her phone out, taking photos for what I assumed would be a very long social media post about family and blessings and gratitude. Russell started unloading coolers from their trunk. My parents stood together, holding hands and looking at the house with expressions of deep satisfaction. This was everything they valued: property, investment, family wealth. And I was standing there with my discount suitcase feeling like I'd crashed someone else's dream vacation. We were halfway through unloading when a car pulled up behind us and a woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with a logo I couldn't quite make out, carrying a clipboard and a large manila envelope. She walked toward us with purpose, her eyes scanning the group, and then she called out a name I wasn't expecting to hear. "I'm looking for Natalie Fletcher." Every head turned toward me. I raised my hand like I was back in middle school, completely confused about why this stranger was singling me out. The woman smiled and walked directly to me, extending the envelope. "I'm Geneva, the property manager. I have the keys and the final paperwork for you to sign." I took the envelope reflexively, my brain trying to process her words. I think there's been some kind of mistake, I said, glancing at Troy, who had frozen mid-step with a cooler in his hands. I'm not. I mean, my brother is the one who. Geneva cut me off gently but firmly. You're Natalie Marie Fletcher, correct? Date of birth March 14th. I nodded slowly. She consulted her clipboard. Then there's no mistake. You're the buyer of record for this property. The earnest money and down payment came from the Ida Fletcher Memorial Trust with you, listed as the sole beneficiary. The mortgage documents are in your name. You're the owner. The envelope suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were stacks of official documents, all with my name printed at the top. Purchase agreement, deed transfer, mortgage disclosure statements, closing documents. Every single page said Natalie Fletcher. I flipped to the financial summary, and the numbers made my stomach drop through the ground. Purchase price, $295,000. Down payment, $85,000. The exact amount of my inheritance. Monthly mortgage payment, $2,300. My entire monthly income from freelancing was around $3,000 on a good month. This mortgage alone would consume most of my earnings, leaving almost nothing for food, utilities, car insurance, or any other expense required for actual survival. The silence that fell over my family was deafening. You could hear the lake lapping against the dock, a bird calling from somewhere in the trees, the distant sound of a boat motor across the water. But from the 6 other adults standing in that driveway, there was nothing. Just the weight of held breath and avoided eye contact. I looked up from the papers, my vision blurring with tears I was fighting to hold back, and turned to my father. What did you do? My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Leonard's face had gone red, that particular shade he got when he was cornered but trying to maintain authority. Now, sweetie, let me explain, he started, but I cut him off. You used my inheritance. It wasn't a question. The evidence was literally in my hands. But saying it out loud made it real in a way that looking at the documents hadn't. Troy recovered first, his salesman instincts kicking in. This is a family house, Natalie. The name on the deed doesn't matter. We're all in this together. Bethany jumped in, her voice taking on that sweet manipulative tone Shed perfected over the years. We thought you'd be happy to contribute to the family. This is an investment for all of us. I stared at her, at all of them, feeling like I was looking at strangers. You used my inheritance without my permission. I repeated, louder this time. You forged my signature on mortgage documents. That's fraud. Constance, my mother, stepped forward with her arms crossed over her chest. Don't be so dramatic, Natalie. It's still in the family. This is a good investment, and you should be proud to be part of it. Proud. She wanted me to be proud that they'd stolen $85,000 from me, that they'd saddled me with a mortgage I couldn't afford, that they'd planned this entire elaborate vacation to a house they bought with my money without ever once asking if I agreed. I looked at Geneva, who was watching this scene unfold with an expression that told me Shed suspected something was wrong all along. Can you give us a minute? I asked her. She nodded and walked back toward her car, but I noticed she didn't leave. She stayed close, like she knew this was about to get much worse. I turned back to my family, the documents clutched in my hands, and felt something crack open inside me. It was like a dam breaking. All the years of swallowing insults and accepting my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy, rushing out at once. How long have you been planning this? My voice was shaking so hard I barely recognized it. Dad stepped forward, putting on his reasonable businessman face. Natalie, I'm the trustee of your grandmother's estate. That gives me the authority to make investments on your behalf. This property is an excellent investment. Values in this area have been skyrocketing. In 5 years, this place could be worth $400,000 or more. In 5 years. I repeated, my voice rising. In 5 years, I'll be bankrupt from trying to pay a mortgage I never agreed to take on. Troy made a dismissive gesture with his hand. Well, I'll pay you back eventually, with interest. This is a family investment. We're pooling resources. I wanted to scream. You didn't pool anything. You took my money without asking me. Did any of you put down a single dollar of your own? The silence that followed was its answer. Cassidy, Troy's wife, jumped into the fray. Why are you being so selfish? This is for the family. Your grandmother would have wanted this. She always talked about how important family legacy was. That broke something else inside me. Don't you dare use my grandmother to justify stealing from me. Grandma Ida left that money to me, not to the family, not to you, to me. Because she knew it'd been overlooked and undervalued my entire life and she wanted me to have something that was just mine. Bethany scoffed. Oh please, here we go with the victim complex again. You're always acting like we treat you badly. I turned to her, tears streaming down my face now. You spent months planning a vacation to a house you bought with my stolen money, and you gave me the worst bedroom. You made me feel guilty for not contributing to a family investment that was funded entirely by money that belonged to me. And you think I have a victim complex. Russell, Bethany's husband, had been quiet this whole time, but I saw something cross his face. Discomfort. Maybe even shame. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but Bethany shot him a look that could have frozen fire and he closed it again. My mother stepped closer, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound caring but was really issuing a threat. After everything we've done for you, this is how you react? We paid for your college. The audacity of that lie almost made me laugh. I had scholarships and student loans that I'm still paying off. You contributed $2,000 my freshman year and then told me I was on my own. We supported your career choice, Dad added. Another lie. They'd spent years telling me that graphic design wasn't a real career, that I should come work for the family business, that I was wasting my potential. You criticized my career every chance you got, I shot back. The only person who ever supported my choices was Grandma Ida, and now you've stolen the money she left me to make sure I could keep making those choices. Troy stepped forward, and for the first time I saw genuine anger in his face instead of the salesman mask. We're family. We share everything. You weren't ready to manage that much money anyway. Dad was doing you a favor. That statement was so insulting, so deeply patronizing, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. When I finally found words, they came out cold and clear. I'm 32 years old. I run my own business. I manage clients and finances and deadlines. But you don't think I'm ready to manage my own inheritance. I looked at each of them in turn. Or is it that you knew if you asked me, I'd say no? So you just took it and figured I'd go along with it, because that's what I always do. I always go along. Bethany tried switching tactics, her voice softening into what she probably thought was reasonableness. Look, it's done. The papers are signed, the house is bought. Let's just enjoy this vacation, and we can figure out the details later. The kids, Troy's children, had come back from exploring and were standing nearby. They were crying now, picking up on the tension and the anger in the adults' voices. Cassidy scooped them up and glared at me like I was the villain in this scenario. Look what you're doing to the children, she hissed. I stared at her in disbelief. I'm not doing anything to them. You're the ones who decided to build your vacation plans on stolen money. Troy held up his hands like he was trying to calm a volatile situation. Okay. Let's all take a breath. Harry's what we'll do. Well, set up a payment plan. Everyone chips in monthly for the mortgage, equally, like a family. I did the math in my head. There were 7 adults here if you counted Russell, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but in this driveway. Split 7 ways. That mortgage was still over $300 per person. Plus utilities, property taxes, maintenance. What happens when someone can't pay? I asked. Or doesn't want to pay? The silence stretched out again. We're family, Troy finally said. Well, figure it out. And there it was, the real plan. They'd all figure it out, and when they stopped paying, the burden would fall on me, because my name was the only one on the mortgage. If we defaulted, my credit would be destroyed. I'd be liable for the debt. They'd walk away and leave me holding a financial disaster I never agreed to create. You planned this, I said slowly, the realization settling over me like ice water. All of it. You knew exactly what you were doing. You rushed the paperwork, used Dad's position as trustee to access my money, Put everything in my name so if it went bad it'd be the one left holding the bag. This was never about family legacy. This was about getting a lake house without any of you having to risk your own money or credit. Dad's face went from red to purple. That's a hell of a thing to accuse your own father of. I held up the mortgage documents. Then explain to me why my name is the only one on here. Explain why you didn't tell me. Explain why you waited until we all showed up here to let me find out. None of them had an answer for that. Or maybe they did, but they knew how it would sound if they said it out loud. Constance tried one more time, her voice hardening. If you make trouble over this, you'll tear this family apart. I looked at my mother, at the woman who was supposed to protect me, and felt the last thread of obligation snap. You'll tear the family apart? You stole from me and you're worried about me making trouble. I turned to Geneva, who was still waiting by her car. What are my options here? She walked back over, consulting her clipboard. As the legal owner, you have the right to occupy the property and determine who has access to it. You also have a 72-hour window to rescind the purchase if you can prove fraud or coercion in the buying process. She pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to me. This is a real estate attorney who specializes in cases like this. Mitchell Crawford. You should call him. I took the card, staring at the name printed in neat block letters. Mitchell Crawford, real estate law, fraud, and elder abuse cases. The fact that Geneva had this card ready suggested she'd been expecting this exact scenario. I looked back at my family, all of them watching me with expressions ranging from anger to calculation to worry. They were waiting to see what I'd do, waiting to see if I'd fold like I always had before. I need all of you to leave, I said quietly. Troy laughed, an ugly sound with no humor in it. We're not going anywhere. We drove 4 hours to get here. I held up the deed that was in my hand. This is my property. My name is on every document. You're trespassing. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Constance actually gasped. You wouldn't dare call us trespassers. We're your family. I pulled out my phone, my hands steadier now than they'd been since Geneva first called my name. Watch me. I walked a few steps away from the group and called the non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I need an officer at 1847 Lakeshore Drive. I'm the property owner and I have several people refusing to leave my private property. The dispatcher asked if I was in danger. I glanced back at my family, who were all frozen in various states of shock. Not physically. But they're refusing to leave, and I want them removed. The dispatcher told me an officer would be there within 20 minutes. I thanked her and hung up. When I turned back to the group, my mother had her hand over her mouth like it'd just committed an unforgivable sin. You called the police on your own family. Her voice was shaking with what I thought was hurt until I looked closer and realized it was rage. You stole from me, I said simply. You're lucky that's all I'm calling. Bethany's face crumpled and she started crying, big dramatic sobs that I would have fallen for a month ago. Now I just watched her performance with cold detachment. Russell put his arm around her, but he was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw something that looked like understanding, maybe even respect. Bethany, we should go, Russell said quietly. She whirled on him. Are you taking her side? He sighed. I'm saying we should leave before the police get here. This has gotten out of hand. Troy started toward me, his finger pointed at my chest. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. When you can't afford this place, don't come crying to us. I stood my ground. When did I ever come crying to you? You've never helped me with anything. You've just used me. Cassidy gathered the kids and started loading them back into the SUV, shooting me looks of pure venom. You're going to regret this, she said as she passed. You'll be alone and broke and you'll realize you threw away your family over money. You threw me away when you decided I was worth less than a down payment, I replied. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Dad made one last attempt, his voice dropping into what he probably thought was a fatherly, reasonable tone. Natalie, please. Let's talk about this like adults. Don't involve the authorities. This is a family matter. I looked at him, at the man who'd held my inheritance hostage while he plotted with my siblings to steal it. You lost the right to call this a family matter when you committed fraud. Every signature you forged, Every document you filed without my knowledge or consent. That's a crime, Dad. Multiple crimes, actually. The sound of a car coming up the driveway made everyone turn. The police cruiser pulled up slowly, and an officer stepped out. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with a name tag that read Brooks, Officer Dalton Brooks. He looked at the scene, at the multiple vehicles, and the obvious family dynamic, and his expression suggested he'd been on calls like this before and didn't enjoy them. Someone called about a trespassing issue. I stepped forward, still holding the envelope full of documents. That was me. I'm Natalie Fletcher, the owner of this property. I handed him my driver's license and the deed. These people are my family. But I've asked them to leave, and they're refusing. Officer Brooks examined the documents carefully, then looked at Geneva, who'd been watching everything from her position near her car. You're the property manager? She nodded and came over, showing him her credentials and the contract that confirmed I was indeed the legal owner. He handed everything back to me and turned to face my family. Folks, the owner has asked you to leave. You need to pack up and go. Dad tried to argue. Officer, this is a family dispute. My daughter is upset, but we can work this out. Brooks held up a hand. Sir, this is private property, and the legal owner has asked you to vacate. Whether it's a family dispute or not doesn't change the property rights. Troy stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. This is bullshit. She can't just. Brooks cut him off with a look that I imagine he'd perfected over years of dealing with people who thought rules didn't apply to them. Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and start packing your vehicle. If you refuse, I can arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace. That threat was apparently enough to break through Troy's bravado. He stormed to his SUV and started yanking out the bags they'd just loaded in. Cassidy was crying now too, her arms around the kids, shooting me looks that promised this wasn't over. Bethany walked past me, stopping just close enough to whisper, "You're dead to me." Russell was loading their car, and when he passed me he said quietly, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if he was apologizing for what happened or for not stopping it, but it was the only genuine statement I'd heard from any of them. My mother made a final attempt as she climbed into Dad's truck. Don't bother coming to Christmas, or Thanksgiving, or any family gathering. You've made your choice. I wanted to scream that they'd made the choice when they decided to steal from me, but I was so tired. I just watched as they loaded up, as 3 vehicles full of my blood relatives prepared to drive away and leave me standing in the driveway of a house I couldn't afford that I'd never wanted to buy. Troy rolled down his window as they were leaving. When you lose this place because you can't make the payments, don't expect any help from us. The caravan pulled away, kicking up dust that hung in the morning sunlight. I stood there until the sound of their engines faded completely, until the only sounds were the lake and the birds and my own breathing. Officer Brooks walked over to me. "You okay, ma'am?" I realized I was crying, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't stop. "I will be," I managed to say. He nodded. "You need to document everything. Get a lawyer. What they did, using your money without permission, that's serious." He handed me his card. "If they come back or harass you, call me directly." After he left, Geneva approached carefully. "Do you want me to stay? Help you get settled?" I shook my head. "I think I need to be alone for a while." She understood. Before she left, she said something that stuck with me. "I've seen this before. Families who think love means everyone's money belongs to everyone, but that's not love. That's exploitation with a greeting card slogan attached." After she drove away, I walked into the house for the first time as its actual, legal, completely trapped owner. It was beautiful inside. Hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, windows that framed the lake like living paintings. And all I could think was that this gorgeous prison was going to destroy my life unless I fought back harder than I'd ever fought for anything. I spent that first night alone in the lake house, sitting on the floor of the empty living room, my phone in my hands, staring at Mitchell Crawford's business card. The house creaked and settled around me, unfamiliar sounds that reminded me I was completely out of my depth. I'd brought a sleeping bag and some groceries, planning for a vacation that had turned into a nightmare. My phone kept buzzing with messages, first from my mother. Please reconsider what you're doing. Your father is devastated. Then from Troy. You're being childish and selfish. Bethany sent a long text about how I was destroying the family over money and how disappointed Grandma Ida would be. That last one made me throw my phone across the room. But after I retrieved it and read through the messages again, something shifted in me. They weren't apologizing. They weren't acknowledging what they'd done. They were still trying to manipulate me, to make me feel like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong by not accepting their theft with gratitude. I looked up Mitchell Crawford's law firm on my laptop. The reviews were strong. People talked about how Head helped them recover from family financial abuse, elder exploitation, trust fraud. I didn't realize there were so many ways for families to steal from each other, so many people who'd been through what I was going through. At 2 in the morning, sitting in a sleeping bag on the floor of a house I owned but couldn't afford, I sent an email to his office requesting a consultation. He called me at 8 the next morning. His voice was professional but kind, the tone of someone who'd heard stories like mine before and didn't judge the victims for trusting their families. We set up a meeting for that afternoon in his office, which was about 40 minutes from the lake house in a small town that served the area. I drove there in a daze, barely remembering the route. His office was on the second floor of a brick building, neat and organized in a way that felt reassuring. Mitchell Crawford was in his 50s with gray hair and glasses, wearing a suit that suggested competence without flashiness. He gestured for me to sit and I handed him the manila envelope that had become the symbol of my destroyed trust. He spread the documents across his desk, reading through each one with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly what to look for. After about 20 minutes of silence broken only by the sound of pages turning, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "This is textbook financial exploitation and fraud," he said bluntly. "Your father, as trustee, had a fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. Using your inheritance to purchase a property without your knowledge or consent violates that duty. The forged signatures on the mortgage documents constitute felony fraud. You have grounds for both civil and criminal charges." The words should have felt like validation, but instead they made me feel sick. We were talking about putting my father in jail. Mitchell must have seen my expression because he gentled his tone. "I know this is hard. But what they did wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was planned. They coordinated to use your money for their benefit, and they only told you after it was too late for you to stop it. That's predatory behavior." He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "You have several options. 1. We can file to rescind the sale based on fraud and coercion. That would get you out of the mortgage and potentially get most of your money back. 2. We can sue your father and siblings for damages. 3. We can file criminal charges for fraud and forgery. Or we can do all three." The thought of going after my family legally made me want to throw up. But the thought of spending the next 30 years paying a mortgage I never agreed to while they faced no consequences made me even sicker. "What would you do?" I asked. Mitchell gave me a small, sad smile. "I'd fight. But I'm not you, and I didn't grow up with these people. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." I asked him to request all the trust documents from my father's office. We'd need to see the full picture before deciding how to proceed. Over the next 3 days, while I stayed at the lake house, trying to figure out my next move, Mitchell worked on getting those documents. What he found was worse than either of us expected. My father hadn't just used my inheritance for the lake house down payment. Had been making investments with my money for months. There were payments to his own real estate company labeled as consulting fees, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. About $20,000 that had just disappeared into the family business with vague notations about trust expenses and management costs. Mitchell called me with the news, and I had to sit down on the porch, my legs giving out. "Your father has been treating your inheritance like his personal bank account," Mitchell said, his voice tight with anger. "This wasn't a one-time bad decision. This was systematic theft." I thought about all the times I'd called asking about accessing my inheritance. All the excuses about paperwork and processing times. He'd been stalling because he was busy spending it. The lake house was just the biggest and most obvious theft, but it wasn't the only one. How much of my grandmother's gift to me had actually been wasted lining my father's pockets? Mitchell explained that we could potentially recover some of those funds, but it would mean a full investigation of the trust, forensic accounting, subpoenas. It would mean war with my family. I thought about Troy saying, "Don't come crying to us." About my mother saying I was dead to her. About Bethany's venomous looks and Cassidy's threats. "They're counting on me backing down," I said to Mitchell. "They think I won't fight because family means too much to me." There was a pause on the line. "Does it?" he asked. I looked out at the lake, at the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. This should have been beautiful. This should have been a gift. Instead, it was evidence of how little my family valued me when money was on the line. "It used to," I said. "But I'm starting to realize that what I thought was family was really just me making excuses for people who used me." Mitchell's voice was gentle when he replied, "Then what do you want to do?" I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "File everything. Civil and criminal. I want them to face consequences. Not because I hate them, but because they need to learn they can't do this to people. Even family. Especially family." Mitchell said, "Head, start the paperwork immediately." That night, I blocked my parents' numbers. Then Troy's. Then Bethany's. I kept Russell unblocked because Head been the only one to apologize, even though I didn't expect to hear from him again. I sat on the dock as the sun set over the lake and felt something strange. It took me a while to identify the feeling. It was relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bending myself into shapes to fit what my family wanted from me. Within a week, Mitchell Crawford had filed a comprehensive legal action that would have made my family's heads spin if they'd understood what was coming. First came the emergency motion to freeze all remaining funds in the Ida Fletcher Memorial Trust to prevent any further unauthorized use. Then came the civil lawsuit against my father for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of assets. The lawsuit named Troy and Bethany as co-conspirators for their knowing participation in the scheme. And finally, Mitchell filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office detailing the forgery, fraud, and financial exploitation. The documents were served to each of them at their homes and businesses within 24 hours of each other. I imagined their shock when process servers showed up at Troy's property management office and at Bethany's house, when my parents opened their door to find legal papers instead of a concerned family member trying to reconcile. My phone started ringing immediately. When blocked numbers didn't work, they borrowed phones from friends and called from those. I didn't answer. My voicemail filled up with messages that ran the emotional gamut from pleading to threatening. My mother's voice, cracking as she said, "How could you do this to your father? He has a heart condition. The stress could kill him." Troy leaving a message that was pure anger. "You're going to regret this. We'll destroy you in court." Bethany sobbing. "I can't believe you're choosing money over family. This is so cruel." I listened to each message once, saved them as Mitchell had instructed for evidence of harassment, and then deleted them from my consciousness as best I could. The counterattack came faster than Mitchell expected. Within 3 days, my family had hired Preston Carr, an attorney whose reputation in the area was more about aggressive tactics than ethical practice. Preston filed a motion to dismiss my civil suit and simultaneously filed a countersuit, claiming I had entered into an oral contract with the family to purchase the lake house as a joint investment. The argument was absurd on its face. There was no evidence of any such agreement, and the timeline proved it'd been kept in the dark until the purchase was complete, but it showed how far they were willing to go. They were trying to rewrite history, to claim it'd been part of the plan all along and was now experiencing buyer's remorse. The legal filings painted me as an ungrateful daughter who was mentally unstable and vindictive, someone who was using false allegations to avoid her financial obligations. Reading the characterization of myself in those documents was surreal. They described a version of Natalie Fletcher, who was manipulative, greedy, and eager to destroy her loving family over a simple misunderstanding. They included affidavits from family friends I'd barely spoken to, people who swore they'd heard me talking excitedly about our lake house at family gatherings. The lies were so brazen I actually laughed when Mitchell showed me the filings. Do they really think a judge will believe this? I asked. Mitchell's expression was grim. They're hoping to muddy the waters enough that you'll settle. It's a common tactic. Make the process so ugly and expensive that the victim gives up. But something unexpected happened. The publicity around the case started spreading beyond just court filings. A local newspaper reporter named Meredith Hayes got wind of the story, probably from scanning recent lawsuit filings like reporters often do, looking for interesting cases. She called Mitchell's office requesting an interview. He asked me if I wanted to talk to her. My first instinct was to say no, to keep this private. But then I thought about how my family was trying to control the narrative. They're telling everyone I'm crazy and ungrateful. I said to Mitchell, maybe it's time people heard my side. He warned me to be careful, that anything I said could potentially be used in court, but he also agreed that public perception might matter if this case dragged on. I met Meredith at a coffee shop halfway between the lake house and Mitchell's office. She was in her 40s, professional but warm, and she started by acknowledging how difficult this must be for me. I want to make sure I tell your story accurately, she said, and I want to understand not just what happened, but why it matters beyond your individual case. We talked for 2 hours. I explained about my grandmother's inheritance, about the months of delays while my father allegedly processed paperwork that he was really just stalling so he could set up the lake house purchase. I described arriving at the property and being blindsided, the way my family immediately tried to gaslight me into thinking I was selfish for objecting to them stealing my money. Meredith took careful notes and recorded our conversation with my permission. What do you want people to understand about this? She asked toward the end. I thought about it for a long moment. I want them to understand that this isn't about the house or even about the money. It's about consent. My family took something that belonged to me and used it for their benefit without asking me. They violated my trust in the most fundamental way. And when I objected, they tried to make me feel guilty for not being grateful that they'd stolen from me. That's not love. That's abuse with a family crest stamped on it. The article ran 3 days later with the headline, "When Family Becomes Theft, Local Woman Sues Parents and Siblings Over Stolen Inheritance." The piece was fair and detailed, laying out the timeline of events and including quotes from Mitchell about the legal issues at play. It didn't name my family members by their full names due to privacy laws, but anyone who knew us would recognize the story. The comment section on the newspaper's website became a battleground. Some people were sympathetic, sharing their own stories of family financial abuse. Others called me greedy and ungrateful, arguing that family is supposed to share everything, and I was selfish for not being happy to contribute to a family investment. Reading the comments was like watching strangers fight over my life, dissecting my choices and my character based on a 1,000-word article. Troy clearly read the article because he published a response on his company's social media page. He didn't name me directly, but the timing and content made it obvious. Recently, there's been negative attention drawn to my family over a private matter that's been misrepresented in the media. I want people to know that my sister is going through a difficult time and is not thinking clearly. Our family purchased a beautiful lake property that we intended to share with all our relatives, including her. She's now claiming this was done without her knowledge, but that's simply not true. We're heartbroken that she's chosen to tear our family apart over money that our grandmother would have wanted to benefit all of us, not just one person. We're cooperating with legal proceedings and trust that the truth will come out. The post got hundreds of comments, mostly from people who knew Troy through business and were taking his side. But it also brought unexpected support for me. People who'd known my grandmother Ida started commenting that she'd specifically talked about leaving money to me, that she'd been worried about how the family treated me. One comment from someone who'd been Grandma Ida's neighbor stopped me cold. Ida told me explicitly that she was leaving money to Natalie because she was the only grandchild who visited her regularly and who didn't constantly ask for loans. She said the rest of the family saw her as a bank. Natalie, if you're reading this, your grandmother wanted you to have that money. Don't let them guilt you. That comment made me cry harder than I had since this whole nightmare started. I screenshotted it and sent it to Mitchell, who said it could be useful if we needed character witnesses. But more than that, It reminded me why I was fighting. Not to punish my family, though consequences were overdue, but to honor what my grandmother had wanted. She'd seen how they treated me. She'd tried to give me a foundation for independence, and they'd stolen it because they thought I was too weak to fight back. Sitting in the lake house that night, I made a promise to Grandma Ida's memory. I wouldn't let them win. No matter how ugly this got, no matter how many family members turned against me, I would see this through. The legal battle intensified over the following weeks in ways I couldn't have predicted. Mitchell filed a motion to compel discovery, demanding all financial records related to the trust and the lake house purchase. My father's attorney, Preston Carr, fought it at every turn, arguing that the trust records were private family documents, not subject to disclosure. The judge disagreed and ordered full disclosure within 30 days. When those records arrived, Mitchell and I spent a long afternoon going through them in his office. What we found was even more damning than the initial theft. My father had been siphoning money from my inheritance starting the week after Grandma Ida's will was probated. The lake house wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of months of systematic theft. The forensic accounting showed payments labeled as trust administration fees that were 3 times the normal rate. Transfers to Leonard's real estate company for property assessments of investments that didn't exist. A payment of $5,000 to Troy's property management company for consultation services that had no documentation or deliverables. My inheritance had been treated like a family slush fund, with Leonard approving payments to himself and his children while telling me the money was tied up in legal processing. By Mitchell's calculation, at least $30,000 beyond the lake house down payment had been misappropriated. And all of it had happened while my father looked me in the eye and told me to be patient, that he was taking care of everything. Mitchell filed an amended complaint adding charges of embezzlement and criminal conspiracy. He argued that Troy and Bethany had knowingly participated in the scheme by accepting payments from the trust and by helping orchestrate the lake house purchase. The evidence showed text messages between my father and Troy discussing how to handle Natalie when the purchase went through, how to frame it as a family investment so I wouldn't object. Those text messages, recovered through the discovery process, were like reading a script for my betrayal. Troy had written, "Shell, go along with it, she always does. And if she doesn't, well, make her feel guilty until she stops complaining." Reading those words, seeing my family discuss manipulating me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected, broke something I didn't know could still break. My family's response was to go nuclear. They hired a PR consultant and started a whisper campaign in the community. Suddenly I was hearing from old friends that they'd been approached by Bethany or Cassidy, who'd tearfully explained that I was having a mental breakdown and making false accusations against my loving family. They showed people carefully edited photos from family gatherings where I was smiling, using them as proof that I'd been happy and involved in the lake house planning. The narrative they pushed was that I was financially irresponsible, that my father had been trying to help me by making smart investments, and that I was now ungratefully attacking him because I wanted to spend the money on frivolous things. The smear campaign worked on some people. I lost 2 clients who decided they didn't want to work with someone involved in family litigation. A cousin I'd been close to growing up called to tell me I was being selfish and that I should drop the lawsuit. But for every person who believed my family's story, there was someone who reached out to offer support. Geneva, the property manager, provided a detailed affidavit describing how my father had pressured her to rush the closing and avoid standard procedures that would have required my direct involvement. She testified that she'd been uncomfortable with the whole transaction, but Leonard had threatened to report her for incompetence if she didn't comply. Her testimony was crucial because it established that my father had known he was circumventing my consent. Another unexpected witness came forward. Pearl, a notary public who'd handled some of the trust documents, contacted Mitchell's office. She'd been bothered by something for months, and the newspaper article had finally pushed her to speak up. She testified that Leonard had brought her documents to notarize, telling her that I'd already signed them but wasn't available to appear in person. She'd notarized based on his representation as a trusted member of the community and as a licensed real estate professional. Now she realized she'd been part of a fraud scheme, and she was willing to testify that she'd never actually witnessed me sign anything. This was huge because it proved the signatures on the trust transfer documents were forged. Officer Dalton Brooks, the policeman who'd responded to the eviction call, reached out to Mitchell on his own initiative. He couldn't testify about the legal issues, but he could describe my family's behavior that day, how they'd acted entitled to property they didn't own, how they'd tried to intimidate me into backing down. Had seen cases like mine before, he told Mitchell. Financial abuse within families was far more common than people realized, and it often followed the same pattern. A vulnerable person, usually a woman, has assets that stronger family members decide to appropriate for her own good. He offered to connect me with victim services and support groups for people dealing with family financial exploitation. I started attending a support group for adult children of financially abusive parents. It met twice a month in a church basement in a nearby town, far enough from my family's social circle that I felt safe. Listening to other people's stories was both heartbreaking and validating. A woman about my age talked about how her parents had stolen her identity and opened credit cards in her name, ruining her credit by the time she was 25. A man in his 40s described how his mother had manipulated him into signing over his inheritance from his father, promising she'd manage it for him, and then spent it all on her new husband. Another woman had prosecuted her own mother for financial exploitation, and she told the group, "It's not about revenge. It's about boundaries. It's about saying you don't get to destroy me just because we share DNA." These people understood in a way my old friends couldn't. They got why I couldn't just work it out with my family. Why mediation or family counseling wasn't the answer when one side had committed crimes and the other side was the victim. They understood the guilt that came with holding your own parents accountable, the way society tells us we owe our families endless forgiveness regardless of how they treat us. And they understood that fighting back wasn't about being vindictive or greedy. It was about survival. If I let my family win, if I backed down and accepted their theft, it'd be telling them they could do this to me forever. It'd be setting myself on fire to keep them warm, and they'd complain I wasn't burning bright enough. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. There were depositions where I had to sit across a table from my father and answer Preston Carr's hostile questions designed to make me look bad. He asked about every financial mistake I'd ever made, every client I'd lost, every month where my freelance income had been low. He was trying to build a case that I was financially incompetent and my father had been right to make investment decisions on my behalf. Mitchell objected to most of the questions as irrelevant, and the judge sustained most of his objections, but the process was still humiliating. My father wouldn't look at me during the entire deposition. He stared at the table and answered questions in a monotone, playing the role of wounded patriarch whose ungrateful daughter had turned on him. Troy's deposition was worse. He was combative and angry, insisting that the lake house purchase had been discussed at family dinners and that it'd been fully informed. When Mitchell produced phone records and text messages proving I'd never been included in those discussions, Troy claimed I must have been told and forgotten. He accused me of having ulterior motives, suggesting maybe I was being influenced by a boyfriend who wanted access to my money. I didn't have a boyfriend, and Mitchell shut that line of questioning down immediately. But it showed how desperate they were to paint me as something other than what I was, a victim of their calculated theft. Bethany didn't show up for her scheduled deposition, claiming illness, and had to be rescheduled twice before finally appearing. When she finally sat down for her deposition, Bethany cried through most of it. She maintained that she'd truly believed the lake house purchase was something I'd agreed to, that Dad had told her I was excited about it. But when Mitchell showed her the timeline, proving that the purchase had been finalized weeks before I was told, she had no good answer. "I thought Dad had talked to you," she kept saying. I trusted him. Mitchell pressed her on the payments she'd received from the trust, the $5,000 that had gone to her house flipping business. She claimed it was a loan she'd planned to pay back. There was no loan paperwork, no promissory note, no repayment schedule. It was just another piece of the theft, another family member helping themselves to my inheritance because my father had made it available. The breaking point came from an unexpected source. Bethany's husband Russell contacted me through a mutual friend, asking if we could meet somewhere private. I was suspicious, but Mitchell said I should hear what he had to say. So we met at a park 2 towns over from where any of our family might see us. Russell looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He sat down on the bench next to me, and for a long moment he just stared at his hands. "I need to tell you something," he finally said. "And I need you to know I'm telling you because it's the right thing to do, not because I want anything from you." I waited. He took a deep breath. I knew. From the beginning, I knew what they were planning with the lake house. My stomach dropped. Russell had always seemed like the reasonable one, the outsider who'd married into the family madness. Learning he'd been part of it felt like another betrayal on top of all the others. But he kept talking. "Troy called me about 6 months ago. He said your dad had access to your inheritance, and they were thinking about using it to buy a property. He wanted my advice on the real estate market in the lake area. I told him it was wrong, that they needed your permission. Troy said they'd tell you after it was done and you'd be fine with it because it was a family investment. I told Bethany I didn't think it was right. She said I didn't understand family dynamics, that you always went along with whatever the family decided." Russell looked at me, his eyes red. "I should have warned you. I should have called you or sent you a message or something. But Bethany threatened divorce if I interfered. She said I was being disloyal to her family, that I was choosing an outsider over her, so I stayed quiet. And I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was angry that He'd known and said nothing. Part of me understood that He'd been trapped in his own way, pressured by my sister to go along with something he knew was wrong. "Are you willing to testify to this?" I asked. He nodded. "I can't stay married to someone who thinks this was okay. I'm filing for separation, and I'll testify to everything I heard, all the conversations about how to handle you, how Troy said you'd never stand up to the family." His testimony was the final piece Mitchell needed. Russell provided text messages He'd saved, voice recordings of phone calls where Troy and my father discussed the lake house plan, and explicitly stated they weren't telling me until after the purchase was complete. In one recording, my father's voice said clearly, "Natalie doesn't need to know until it's done. If we ask her permission, she might say no, and then we lose the property." Troy's voice responded, "Shell, get over it. She always does." Hearing their voices, listening to them plot my financial exploitation like it was a business strategy, made me physically ill, but it also gave me something I hadn't had before: absolute proof of their intent. With Russell's testimony and the recorded conversations, the case against my family became overwhelming. Mitchell filed a motion for summary judgment on the civil claims, arguing that the evidence of fraud and conspiracy was so clear that a trial wasn't necessary. The prosecutor handling the criminal case was suddenly much more interested, seeing that this wasn't just a family squabble, but a documented conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement. Preston Carr, my family's attorney, must have realized how bad things looked because he reached out to Mitchell about settlement discussions. That's when things got really ugly because my family realized they might actually lose. The pressure campaign intensified in ways that crossed the line from legal maneuvering into harassment. My mother started sending me letters, handwritten pages filled with guilt and manipulation. One letter claimed that the stress was literally killing my father, that He'd been hospitalized with chest pains, and the doctors said it was my fault for causing him so much stress. She enclosed a photo of him in a hospital bed, looking frail and old. Mitchell confirmed through medical record subpoenas that my father had gone to the emergency room with what turned out to be acid reflux. Not a heart attack, but the manipulation attempt was clear. She wanted me to feel like I was murdering my own father by holding him accountable for crimes He'd committed. Bethany showed up at my apartment one evening, somehow getting past the building security by telling the doorman she was my sister and it was an emergency. She pounded on my door until I opened it, and then she started screaming at me in the hallway where all my neighbors could hear. "Hez our father! How can you do this to him? He raised you, he fed you, he loved you, and this is how you repay him." I tried to close the door, but she blocked it with her foot. "He stole from me, Bethany. He committed crimes." She was crying, her face red and twisted with anger and pain. "We're family. Family doesn't put each other in jail. We work things out. Then why didn't you work it out before you stole my inheritance?" I shouted back. "Why didn't anyone think about being family when you were spending my money on a house I didn't agree to buy?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there crying, and I felt a moment of pity for her until she said, "You've always been jealous of us. You've always resented that we were successful and you weren't. This is just your revenge for being the family failure." That killed any sympathy I had. "Get out." She left, finally, but not before screaming that I was dead to her and she never wanted to see me again. I closed the door and slid down it, sitting on the floor of my apartment and shaking. But for every attack, there was unexpected support. Uncle Franklin, my father's brother who I barely knew, called me out of the blue. "I heard what Leonard did to you," he said without preamble. "And I want you to know I believe you because he tried the same thing with me 15 years ago." I was shocked. Franklin explained that he and Leonard had jointly inherited some money from their parents. Leonard, as the executor, was supposed to divide it equally. Instead, had invested Franklin's share in a property deal that went bad, losing most of the money. When Franklin threatened to sue, Leonard had paid him back, but only after months of legal pressure. "Your father has always believed that what's yours is his, if he thinks he can make better use of it," Franklin said. "I cut contact with him after that. I'm sorry you had to learn the hard way what kind of man he really is." Franklin offered to testify about the pattern of behavior, and Mitchell jumped on it. Having another family member willing to state that Leonard had a history of misappropriating family funds would be powerful in court. But more than that, Franklin's call reminded me that not everyone in the extended family was against me. There were people who'd seen through Leonard's facade, who understood that his smooth professionalism and family man image hid someone who saw other people's money as his to control. Franklin invited me to Thanksgiving with his side of the family. People I barely knew but who'd heard my story and wanted to support me. It was the first time I realized I might actually survive this with some family connections intact, just not the ones ED started with. Geneva, the property manager, became something close to a friend during this time. She checked in regularly, helped me understand the practical aspects of owning the lake house, and connected me with resources for managing rental property. She felt guilty, she told me, for not standing up to my father more forcefully during the purchase process. But her testimony and documentation had been crucial to my case, and I told her that. She suggested that instead of selling the house, which would be difficult in the middle of legal proceedings and might result in a loss since we hadn't owned it long enough to build equity, I should consider renting it out as a vacation property. "The rental income in this area is strong," she explained. "If we manage it right, it could cover the mortgage and expenses, maybe even generate a small profit." The idea seemed impossible at first. I couldn't afford to furnish it or maintain it, but Geneva walked me through the numbers. If I used some of the money I might recover from the lawsuit settlement to do basic furnishing, and if she managed it professionally, taking a percentage of the rental income, the house could actually support itself. It was a risk, but it was also a way to turn my family's theft into something that might actually work for me instead of destroying me. I agreed to think about it. The possibility that the lake house might become an asset instead of an anchor started to shift how I thought about the whole situation. Maybe my family had accidentally given me an opportunity, even as they tried to trap me. The settlement negotiations began in earnest when the prosecutor scheduled a meeting with Leonard to discuss the criminal charges. Preston Carr finally admitted to Mitchell that the evidence against my family was problematic and suggested we work out an agreement that would resolve both the civil and criminal cases. I met with Mitchell to discuss what I wanted. "I want my money back," I said. "All of it. The down payment, the fees Leonard stole, everything. I want written admission of what they did, and I want my father to surrender all trustee rights permanently." Mitchell nodded. "That's reasonable. What about the criminal charges?" I thought about my father in that hospital bed in my mother's photo, about Bethany crying in my hallway, about Troy's children who'd been dragged into this mess. "I don't want him to go to jail," I said finally. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I want accountability, and I want my money back, and I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. But I don't want to destroy them." Mitchell looked at me carefully. "You're being more generous than they deserve." I shrugged. "Maybe. But I have to live with my choices after this is over." I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I did the right thing. Getting my father convicted of felonies might be justice, but it feels like overkill when what I really need is my money and my freedom back. Mitchell drafted a settlement proposal. My family would pay back the full amount stolen. Leonard would plead to reduce charges with probation instead of jail time, and all of them would sign affidavits admitting to their roles in the fraud. The negotiation took weeks of back and forth. My family tried to reduce their financial obligations, arguing they didn't have access to that much cash. Mitchell was firm. They found the money to hire attorneys and PR consultants. They can find the money to pay back what they stole. Eventually they agreed. Leonard would surrender the $20,000 in fees he'd taken, plus pay back the full $85,000 down payment from his business accounts. Troy and Bethany would each contribute $15,000 toward the mortgage, as restitution and apology, money that would go into a fund to cover the property costs, until I could get it stabilized as a rental. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue further civil damages, and I'd support the reduced criminal charges that would keep Leonard out of prison. The day we all signed the settlement agreement was surreal. We met in a conference room at the courthouse, our respective attorneys present, everything formal and cold. My father looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, his face lined. He wouldn't look at me. My mother wasn't there. She'd refused to come, sending word through Preston that she couldn't bear to be in the same room with me. Troy signed the papers with angry slashes of the pen, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Bethany cried quietly as she signed, Russell sitting beside her, even though they were separated. When it was done, when all the signatures were collected and notarized and filed, Preston gathered my family and led them out without a word to me. Mitchell waited until they were gone before turning to me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it. I felt tired. I felt sad. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in months. Free. "I feel like I can breathe again," I said. The settlement gave me back most of my inheritance, though legal fees and time had cost me some of it. More importantly, it freed me from the mortgage burden that my family had tried to saddle me with. With the restitution funds and Geneva's help, I started renovating the lake house for rental use. I chose furniture and decor that had nothing to do with my family's aesthetic, making it mine rather than ours. I spent weekends there alone, painting and arranging and slowly transforming the space from a symbol of betrayal into something that might actually represent my future instead of my past. The rental strategy worked better than I'd hoped. Geneva marketed it aggressively to tourists and weekend visitors, and within 2 months we had steady bookings. The income covered the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance with enough left over that I could start saving again. More than that, it gave me a retreat. When renters weren't there, I'd drive up to the lake and spend time in a place that was beautiful and peaceful and entirely under my control. The lake that was supposed to drown me in debt became a place where I learned to float. I was learning that sometimes the worst things that happen to us contain seeds of unexpected growth if we're willing to tend them. In the months after the settlement, my life slowly reorganized itself around a new definition of family. My parents sent a formal apology letter that was clearly written by Preston Carr, full of legal language and void of genuine remorse. "We regret that our actions caused you distress, and we acknowledge that we should have communicated more clearly about the trust administration." There was no admission that they'd been wrong, no recognition of the pain they'd caused. Just corporate speak designed to fulfill the settlement terms without actually accepting responsibility. I read it once, filed it with the rest of the legal documents, and never responded. They'd paid their financial debt, but the emotional debt was something they'd never even acknowledged owing. Troy never apologized at all. After the settlement was signed, he blocked me on every platform and told mutual friends that I was dead to him. His wife Cassidy made sure to spread rumors that I'd extorted money from the family using false accusations, that I'd taken advantage of my father's generosity and then twisted it into something ugly. Some people believed her. I lost touch with a few cousins who decided Troy's version of events made more sense than mine. But I also gained clarity. Anyone who could hear my story and think I was the villain wasn't someone I needed in my life anyway. Bethany and Russell's separation became a divorce. She blamed me for destroying her marriage, sending one final text before I blocked her, I hope you're happy with your precious house. It cost me everything. I wasn't happy about her marriage ending, but I also wasn't responsible for it. Russell had made his own choice to tell the truth, and Bethany had made her choice to participate in fraud and then refused to take responsibility. Their marriage had apparently been fragile enough that honesty broke it, which said more about their relationship than it did about my lawsuit. Russell stayed in touch with me, which surprised both of us. We'd never been close when he was married to my sister, but going through the legal process together had created an odd bond. He was rebuilding his life too, figuring out who he was, outside of the Fletcher family expectations. We met for coffee sometimes, two people who'd escaped the same toxic system comparing notes on recovery. Uncle Franklin made good on his invitation, and I spent Thanksgiving with his family that year. It was smaller than the elaborate Fletcher gatherings I'd grown up with, just Franklin and his wife and their adult children and a few friends who'd become like family over the years. There was no assigned seating or formal program or carefully orchestrated conversation topics designed to show off achievements. People just talked and laughed and passed food and asked genuine questions about each other's lives. Franklin's daughter asked about my graphic design work and seemed actually interested in my answer. His son told a story about a business failure he'd had and everyone commiserated instead of judging. It was so different from my family's performative perfection that I almost cried into my mashed potatoes. Some of my mother's cousins reached out, people I'd barely seen over the years, because they'd had their own falling outs with my father. They shared stories of Leonard's controlling behavior, his need to be seen as the successful patriarch, his tendency to use money as a weapon. One cousin told me that Leonard had loaned her money when she was going through a divorce and then held it over her for years, bringing it up at every family gathering to remind her that she owed him. Shed finally cut contact because the emotional cost of his generosity was too high. Hearing these stories was painful but also validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the only one who'd seen the manipulative behavior beneath the respectable surface. It'd just been unfortunate enough to be in a position where he could really damage me. The lake house became more than just a rental property. It became proof that I could take something broken and make it work. Geneva and I developed a good system where she handled most of the day-to-day management, and I focused on the creative aspects, designing the listing photos and writing the descriptions and choosing the artwork for the walls. When there weren't renters, I'd spend weekends there alone, or with the few friends who'd stuck by me through the legal nightmare. We'd kayak on the lake, cook meals on the porch, sit by the fire pit Geneva had suggested I install. One evening, watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange, my friend Miranda said, "You know what's amazing? They tried to trap you with this place and instead you made it your freedom." She was right. The lake house was supposed to be an anchor dragging me down, a constant reminder that my family could take whatever they wanted from me. Instead, it had become evidence that I could fight back and win. More than that, it had taught me the difference between family and relatives. Family is people who care about your well-being, who respect your boundaries, who would never dream of taking advantage of you. Relatives are just people you share DNA with, and DNA doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. I had relatives who'd stolen from me. But I was building family with people like Geneva and Russell and Uncle Franklin, people who chose to treat me with respect and honesty. A year after the settlement, I'd saved enough from the lake house income and my freelancing to put a down payment on a small condo in the city where I lived. It was mine, truly mine, from the first payment to the choice of paint colors. The day I moved in, Russell helped me haul boxes, and Uncle Franklin showed up with a housewarming gift. Geneva drove down from the lake to see my new place. Miranda brought pizza. We sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating from paper plates and drinking cheap wine, and someone made a toast to new beginnings. I looked around at these people who'd become my chosen family and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not for the pain I'd been through, but for having survived it and come out the other side with better judgment about who deserved space in my life. The next weekend, I hosted a small gathering at the lake house to celebrate. It was the first time I'd invited people there as my guests, rather than as renters. Russell came, Uncle Franklin and his wife, Geneva, a few friends from the support group who understood the significance of reclaiming a space that had been forced on me. We spent the day swimming and grilling, and sitting on the dock talking about everything and nothing. As the sun started to set, someone asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you regret how things went with your parents and siblings? It was a fair question. I'd lost most of my biological family. Some people would see that as a failure. I looked out at the water, at the golden light dancing on the gentle waves. I regret that they made me choose between my dignity and their approval, I said carefully. I regret that they valued money more than they valued me. I regret that I spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I paused, thinking about how to explain what I'd learned. But I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret fighting back. Because if I hadn't, I'd still be trapped in a relationship where I was expected to sacrifice everything to prove my loyalty while they sacrificed nothing. That's not family. That's servitude. Uncle Franklin raised his glass. To Natalie, who taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even when they share your last name. We all drank to that. As the evening wore on and people started packing up to leave, I found myself alone on the dock for a few minutes, listening to the water lap against the posts and feeling the cooling air on my skin. I thought about my grandmother Ida, about the inheritance she'd left me that was supposed to give me freedom. In a twisted way, it had. Just not in the way she'd intended or in the way my family had tried to use it. The lake house had been their weapon, their trap, their way of controlling me while pretending it was generosity. But I'd turned it into something else, a source of income that let me rebuild my savings. A retreat where I could process everything that had happened. A symbol that I could take the worst thing my family had done to me and transform it into something valuable on my own terms. They'd taught me an expensive lesson about trust, about the difference between love and manipulation, about how people will use the language of family to justify treating you in ways they'd never accept from strangers. But I'd learned it, and learning it had set me free. Sitting on that dock, I realized something important. Family is supposed to be about love, not leverage. Real family doesn't steal from you and call it sharing. Real family doesn't manipulate and gaslight you when you object to being exploited. Real family doesn't make you choose between your well-being and their approval. The people who'd raised me, who'd taught me that family comes first, had forgotten that I was family too. They'd forgotten that the responsibility to care for family members goes both ways. They'd expected me to sacrifice endlessly while they gave nothing back but demands and expectations and criticism dressed up as concern. And when I'd finally said no, when I'd finally drawn a boundary and defended it, they'd acted like I was the one breaking the family bond. But I hadn't broken anything. They'd broken it years ago with every dismissal, every condescension, every time they'd treated my needs as less important than their wants. It just finally stopped pretending the bond was still intact. It stopped performing the role of dutiful daughter who existed to make them look good and make their lives easier. It stepped out of the script they'd written for me, and they couldn't forgive me for it because my independence reminded them that they'd never actually controlled me with love, only with guilt and obligation. And once I stopped accepting guilt as currency, they had nothing left to trade. The hard truth I'd learned was that you can't negotiate with people who don't respect your boundaries. You can't reason with people who believe they have a right to your resources just because you're related. You can't have a healthy relationship with people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away. Or in my case, to fight back so hard that they learn they can't treat you as a convenient victim anymore. My family had seen my kindness as weakness, my desire for connection as leverage they could exploit. They'd been wrong. Kindness isn't weakness, it's a choice. And I could choose to stop extending it to people who'd proven they didn't value it. The lake house was supposed to trap me in their dysfunction, to bind me to them through debt and obligation and guilt. Instead, it had set me free. Free from the illusion that they cared about me beyond my usefulness. Free from the belief that I owed them infinite forgiveness, regardless of how they treated me. Free from the fear that standing up for myself would leave me alone, because I'd learned that being alone was better than being with people who hurt you, and I wasn't even alone. I'd found people who chose to be in my life, who treated me with respect, who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. That was family. The rest was just biology, and biology doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. As I stood up from the dock and walked back toward the house, I made a final promise to myself. I would never again sacrifice my well-being to make someone else comfortable. I would never again silence my voice to keep the peace. I would never again accept love that came with conditions, strings, and invoices. The people who truly cared about me wouldn't ask me to. And the people who demanded those sacrifices didn't deserve access to me in the first place. That lake house, beautiful and terrible in its origins, had taught me the most important lesson of my life. That sometimes the greatest act of love is loving yourself enough to walk away from people who don't. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Have you ever had someone close to you use love as a weapon to control you? Drop your stories in the comments because I guarantee you're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe, because we need to keep talking about these things that families try to keep hidden. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries even with people you love. Especially with people you love. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope that wherever you are in your own journey with complicated family dynamics, you find the strength to choose yourself. You deserve people who treat you well. Never forget that. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you were born into.